Hello, students. This is part 3 of the Industrialization, Urbanization, and Immigration presentation, which is under the umbrella of the expansion and industrial period of America from 1890 to 1920. Today, in this portion, I'm going to first talk about industrialization after 1865. There's a definition that I put here. It says industrialization, the process of a society changing from an agricultural way of life to an industrial one. So what that means is instead of being dependent on farming as a way of life and producing goods and services through the way of farming, people are more geared towards going to factories that have machines and equipment that produce goods and services. And industries are basically factories that produce goods and services. We talked about textile industry, steel industry, mining industry, meatpacking industry, automobile industry, and there's a whole host of and variety of industries that produce goods and services by way of a labor force, lower cost production, raw materials. We'll get more into that later. What you're asked to do here is fill out a T-chart with the positives and negatives of industrialization. What are some good things about working in a factory relates to somebody who used to work on a farm? What are some negative things about working in a factory or in an industry? So take time to do that. This slide says, what factors cause the rise of big business? And there are a variety of factors I'm going to talk about here. First, you had access to raw materials and energy like wood, water, coal, ore, zinc, and iron. So there's an access to raw materials for those businesses to have so they can use it to make their products. And we know that iron ore is used to make steel. Steel is a man-made product. And there are a lot of other things you can make with steel, like skyscrapers, planes, cars, bridges, any type of structure, tools. And we know that Pittsburgh was the center of the steel industry. Another aspect that made businesses grow was the availability of a workforce. You need workers to perform the tasks, to make your products and services. Simple as that. Inventions. Some important inventors during this time: electricity, the light bulb by Thomas Edison, and he was very important. Electricity helped businesses stay open later and longer during the nighttime, and they could hire more workers. So that was very vital in helping businesses grow, that invention. Wright brothers, the airplane, and airplanes need raw materials for them to be made, and that's going to help businesses grow. And you have Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone, and businesses can communicate across the country, across the world by use of the telephone. That's going to make their business expand and grow. Then you have financial resources. Financial deals with money, like money, banks, stock markets. So that's the capital resource that helps businesses grow. Another factor about big business, here's a question. It says, how did industrialization and the rise of big business influence life on American farms? There's two factors here. Mechanization, an example is the reaper, had reduced farm labor and increased production. What that basically means is mechanization is the use of machines to do work. I'm going to give you an example. Say that Johnny Appleseed or Johnny Smith owns a farm out in the Great Plains, and he has 10 field hands that help him plant corn and wheat and handle his cattle and horses and whatnot. And there's this tractor that's invented, and he doesn't need the farm hands to do the work anymore for him. So the tractor being used to do the farm work is an example of mechanization. The use of machines is going to reduce the needs of him keeping those field hands to work his farm. So A, he's going to save money, and B, he's going to produce more. He's going to produce more on his farm with this machine, which is a tractor. And what's going to happen is, if you look at the second factor on this page, it says industrial developments in cities created increased labor needs. So those people who worked on the farms were replaced by machines. So where are they going to go to find work? They're going to go to the cities. They're going to go to factories. They're going to go to a steel mill to find work. They're going to go to an automobile to find work. They're going to go to a coal mine to find work. They're going to go to a textile mill to find work. So they're going to go to cities because they have a lot of industry, because they're not needed on the farms anymore because of mechanization. So that's going to change the way farms operate in the United States. And the number of people who farmed has dropped a lot since the 1890s to our day today. Other aspects about big businesses. It says, what created the rise and prosperity in big businesses? And here's a new word, prospered. It means to become wealthy or to improve financially in terms of money or resources. And other question says, what were some examples of big businesses? And the information says big businesses prospered because, number one, national markets were created by transportation advances. And I'm going to tell you what that means. What that means is that transportation advances like the automobile, the railroad system, subways, and other types of vehicles helped businesses transport their goods and services all over the country into cities around the nation. So they didn't only have to be limited to selling their goods and services in their neighborhoods or in their cities and their towns, so they can branch out because, wow, you got this big train that's going through your state or your community. You can ship corn and cattle and clothing and steel and other products to other places around the nation. Places like Chicago, places like Atlanta, places like Detroit, LA, you name it. Other things that helped the rise of big businesses and them prospering is that you had the captains of industry. And the captain of industry means it's a person who is the big dog in charge of an industry. They're very wealthy, very rich, they're smart, they have a lot of ingenuity, they have a lot of drive. And there's 4 people you need to learn about. And we have John D. Rockefeller, who was the captain of the oil industry. And a good way to remember that is rocket fuel. Rocket fuel's oil. Very important man in the oil industry, particularly in Ohio and the Midwest. And you have Mr. Andrew Carnegie. This man was 5'3". He was a small man, but he had big ideas, and he changed the world forever. So he was the captain of the steel industry, and he had his steel industry was headquartered in Pittsburgh, and he was a beast, Andrew Carnegie, and he was an immigrant. So this shows how immigrants played a role in making our country great, our economy, inventions, and businesses grow. The next gentleman is Henry Ford, who's the captain of the automobile industry, and he was centered in Detroit. And then you have Cornelius Vanderbilt. He was the captain of the railroads and shipping industry. And a good way to remember Cornelius Vanderbilt is that Vanderbilt built railroads. It's a good way to help you remember that. Another aspect is that advertising. So businesses were able to advertise in magazines, catalogs, on billboards about what products they're going to sell, and that's going to attract customers. So they found a way to advertise and put things in newspapers and print. So people say, wow, I'm going to go shop at that business. I'm going to buy stuff from here, buy stuff from there. So advertising played a big role, and businesses get their message out to the consumer. And then another aspect that made businesses grow real big is lower cost production. What that means is that a business can produce a good and service with less money. They don't have to spend a lot of money to produce things for their business. So that's going to lead to them laying off workers. And what's going to replace those workers is a machine or some type of equipment. And it says, what are some examples of big businesses? Railroads, oil, and steel. Those are examples. Okay. Let me go back here. Oh, let me go back a little bit. Sorry about that. When you have these big businesses, you're going to have some corruption. You're going to have some mistreatment, because that's an aspect of industrialization. Bosses usually don't care how their workers feel in many cases. Not all, but many. So you had the rise of labor unions. And there's two questions here. It says, what is a labor union? What are other factors labor unions in the I'm going to read that again. What are other factors that led to labor unions in the late 1800s to the early 1900s? So I'm going to give you some information about labor unions. A labor union is an organized group of workers who strive to improve safety, benefits, wages, and rights for workers. The first labor union in the United States was the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. Another aspect, strikes were held. Strikes are where workers refuse to work because they are not treated fairly by their bosses, employers, or the company in general. So people protest and they sit out of work if they feel like their boss is not treating them fairly. Simple as that. You still have strikes today. The most famous strike was the Homestead Strike of 1892. This chart shows big business labor unions and conflicts. You had the Haymarket Riot, and you had the Homestead Strike and the Pullman Strike. One individual I forgot to mention to you that was a captain of industry was George Pullman, and he was instrumental in creating the sleeping car, which provided comfort to passengers on trains. So read through this information about the causes and the outcome of these major strikes that happened because of the rise of big business. This is the progressive movement, and I'm going to talk about that later in a different slide. So what you'll need to do is to listen to this and answer the questions that are embedded in the video. Thank you for listening, and have a blessed day. Peace.